Okay, well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're down to 10 days to go. We've narrowed the field down both in the House and the Senate, and we're moving forward with the key businesses, items of the session. And we look forward to talking about those key items as we go forward in the home stretch. I had hoped to have Senator Hill or Braun with us today, but the good news is they're off negotiating the budget with their counterparts, which is the one thing we really have to do is get that work going on the budget. So with that, I've got Senator Brown with me and Senator O'Ban, and I'll turn it over to Leader Christensen.
Thank you, Senator Schessler. We're down to the last 10 days, and we had a Five Corners meeting with the governor yesterday. We had the leaders of the four caucuses there. The conversation was all about how do we get out of here by March 10th. And all of us agreed that our intent, of course, is to be out of here by March 10th, but that to do that, we've got to get really into the trenches now with the negotiating teams related to the budgets and come to some conclusions quickly on that. And so on a daily basis, you're going to see our teams working with each other to find out where are those lines drawn in the sand for the different caucuses. And I've got with me today, I've got Representative Wilcox and Representative Magendas, and we look forward to your questions.
We can both chambers talk about what's expected to be on the floor in the coming days. I know it's 5 o'clock cutoff on Friday, so what are we going to see between now and then?
Well, we did a package pull, so we had a head start, and we've caucused on the entire yellow book that's out there. We will have a bunch of bills that came out of rules today that'll have the information ready to caucus on later today. We expect to work full days working on House bills as the very best we can.
But can you name any key bills that you specifically are interested in or think the public would be interested in?
You know, right now I think everything's in play that got out of committee. The number one document obviously is the budget. Everything, the McCleary bill was signed by the governor, and then we have very modest supplemental transportation and capital budgets.
In the House, this morning we were caucusing on the three bills as it relates specifically to the capital budget. We were actually prepared to go out there and vote for those. There's been a little bit of a delay on that, so we're waiting to get some feedback from the Democrat leadership as to why there's a delay. That being said, we've got a couple of pages on the floor calendar, and so we've got our team right now is in caucus going over all of those bills. We've been told that any one of them at any time can be brought up for consideration, so at this point everything's still alive over in the House.
But we're really looking forward to a charter school bill.
Absolutely.
We had some drama on that on Thursday. We had a motion for immediate consideration in education, which came out as a tie, which unfortunately didn't move it forward. We also had a floor amendment on the budget that would have restored funding for the commission. There are two title-only bills in play, House Bill 3000 and 3002.
And a Senate bill as well. It seems like there's a Senate title only. So
Yeah.
it's clearly NTIB. So is your expectation that this is going to be part of the final negotiation related to the budget?
Well, it's so important. It'd be nice if we got that thing out before it's in danger right on sine die. So I would hope for action any day.
Well, my concern with it is that I hate to see where we're holding kids hostage. I mean, there's a lot of other issues that that we need to talk about. And for example, the budget stabilization account and how that's going to be used, the differences between the House budget and the Senate budget, not using the budget stabilization account. And so there's plenty of other bigger fish I think we need to be dealing with on that, rather than getting stuck holding kids hostage over charter schools. We want to make sure those kids are taken care of, and we believe it's a viable option for our education system, and I know there's bipartisan support in both chambers to deal with it properly.
When we passed our budget out Friday, we did put our money where our mouth was. It is funded in the Senate budget in anticipation that we didn't shrink on that.
The speaker's been supportive more of a plan that would maybe put charter schools under districts as alternative schools. Is your caucus amenable to that? Is the Senate amenable to a plan like that? And have you gotten any indication the speaker's moved on that?
So we've heard we're expecting a counter proposal from the HDC on this any day now. In fact, probably within the next 24, 48 hours. And there have been suggestions that I've had with my counterparts over there about giving districts right of first refusal about moving the charter commission under OSPI that I think we're amenable to, but we haven't heard their counterproposal yet, so we don't know how far they go.
But to be clear, I don't think we're amenable to them being simply ALEs.
Oh, no.
They've got to be real charter schools. They can be locally authorized, that's already possible, but they've got to be real charter schools.
What about maintaining the track for expansion? I mean, like, there's been a lot of talk of a solution that might essentially allow these ones to stay open but not permit the expansion to a maximum of 40 that is permitted under the initiative. Would you be amenable to a solution that didn't allow for the same type of expansion, but that allowed the current schools to stay open?
Well, I would say at this point, we've got the same position as the Senate does.
Based on the hearings we've had in we've had 3 hearings in Ways and Means. Based on what we saw, I think it would be a tragedy to stop in our tracks where we are, because we've seen great progress. The governor's been to tour charter school in Tacoma to see the good work they're doing. So I think it'd be a tragedy to stop it where we're at right now.
I-732, is there any chance of any modified version making it out of the legislature?
I haven't heard from the other chamber any interest in it. A little bit of chatter outside the doors, but takes 2 to tango.
Does your side have any interest in modifying it? And I'm asking in the context of it's universally considered flawed, and right now we've got a legislature that seems to be content to let a flawed initiative go to the November ballot.
Well, we've got members that have entertained those conversations that would be open to a new and improved model. But we're not into picking winners and losers or raising taxes.
What are the lines in the sand on your budgets, since you're trying to find out where the other side's lines in the sand are? Where are yours?
Well, clearly, I think one of the most important lines is the sand is that the House doesn't fund K-3 class size in 17-19. That doesn't even pass the straight face test.
Okay, so that's your problem with the House. What I'm trying to find out is, where are your lines in the sand? Not where do you not like what they?
Well, we've shown that we're not inclined to raise taxes. That's for certain. We think that going to the budget stabilization account should be a last resort, not a first option.
Your 4 years depends on the pension merger. Do you need to pass that bill out of the Senate to show you can pass it?
We could. I think it clearly, this idea related to pensions has been around for about 15 years. Situations change and evolve, and it's something to consider, because one of the pieces in this is it creates quite a significant savings to our local school districts who were trying to walk out of this problem they've experienced in recent years.
So you would tie it to the McCleary school funding
Well,
issue too?
it could be. I mean, we know that to roll back the levy lid, we're going to have to come up with some money for levy equalization assistance. So there is benefits to local school districts in it. So it's an idea certainly worth discussing.
And do you think that can pass the Senate, given that it didn't get a majority to reject the amendment?
If it counts, it could be there.
But isn't the budget balanced with it?
That's one. The current budget uses that, yes.
So it's like a mirror of what happened last year, where the Democrats passed the budget, but not the revenue bills. You passed the budget, but without this bill.
We could certainly get there.
A Voting Rights Act that made it out of the Senate committee, is that going to come to a floor vote this?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so, John. It came out of rules today. I didn't hear a single no vote in there.
What's your position on bringing it to a vote?
I'd like to get to a conclusion that gives local government tools and reduces the likelihood of litigation.
Do you have any problems with the version that came out of Senator Roach's committee?
I think it still could use some fine tuning.
Like what?
It's simply a mirror of the Federal Voting Rights Act with not a whole lot of changes. And it may give the tools, but it could also increase litigation. And I think that has been the one thing that school directors, cities, counties, ports, and others have said they don't want to be a magnet for litigation. They want the tools, but they really don't cherish the thought of being in litigation in perpetuity.
In addition to the Voting Rights Act, a number of Democrat-sponsored policy-type bills, Voting Rights Act, the Opportunity Gap legislation.
We moved the opportunity gap legislation out of Ways and Means last night. I think
That's exactly my question.
it was almost unanimous.
Yeah, and a lot of them have moved out of committee, but will you bring them to the floor? Do you have any comment?
I think it's highly likely that we will, because there are parts of it that are very, very important to our caucus. There's parts I'm sure important to Senator Nelson as well as the House. But it's a work in progress, but it is moving.
On the operating budget, this is almost a clone of about the last 4 years. Your side says no new taxes, other side says we need to close tax breaks. Why don't you guys just split the difference, give them a couple tax breaks and go home?
Because I don't believe we need it, John.
Okay.
Well, and I would
The other
also
side
say-
just as adamant on its stance.
John, I don't believe we need it, and my caucus believes we don't need it.
John, it's a heck of a lot easier to run out a budget that goes high than it is to run out a budget that goes low. So the sky's really the limit in a bargaining position from the House Democrats, right? So they're always going to be on the high side. That's just kind of the way the situation is set up.
Anyone in the Senate have whooping cough or symptoms?
We've had flu, we've had colds. Haven't heard any whooping cough in the Senate yet. My wife insisted before the last granddaughter was born I was going to have my whooping cough shot in advance.
The House does though, right? Is that
Yes.
only one number?
We have one member. We have one member in the House in our caucus that actually was, as soon as she was diagnosed, made it aware to us. We've actually got 3 health departments involved: Snohomish County Health, Thurston County Health, Washington State Health. There were notifications put out to all the members and all the staff. We just found this out, by the way, yesterday, and so we've gone through the protocols necessary, got the information to the clerk's office as soon as possible to make sure that any communications that they had to deal with, they had all the information necessary.
Or is it back to the policy question regarding those Democratic policy bills? Is there, charter schools is obviously a big issue for you guys. Is there any, and you used the phrase taking hostages earlier, is there any quid pro quo there as far as moving to one without the others?
Well, look, charter schools, just like McClary, is a focus on kids. That's what this is about. You've got a couple of different ways to educate our kids that are distinctly different between, the public school system as we've seen it, but some of the problems we've had in the public schools that created the need for charter schools that we have right now. Our concern is that we're going to take, even though the number of students that are affected by this are only about 1,200 students out of 1 million students, we want to be able to provide the best education opportunities for these kids that have been predominantly located in impoverished areas that are in areas where their local schools have had a problem with failures. The public schools have. It has been, initially, it was actually brought forth by Democrats as far as the original legislation before even the initiative was passed by the citizens. This is a bipartisan issue. Education is and should be a bipartisan issue. And I think that we are learning as a legislature, I hope, that it's not a one-size-fits-all for education. Charter schools has fit that size necessary to provide the great education opportunities in those areas, just like we have in other parts of the state. And so when I say I don't want to see kids held hostage, I don't want any kids held hostage. I don't care if it's one. But we've got a fix in our education system that is proven to be very successful. And if we're going to hold that issue of 1,200 students hostage over all the other budgetary decisions we're making down here, I just think that's a crime. Frankly, I do.
Senator Chesler, will you hold up bringing Democratic policy bills to the floor until we, see that charter school?
We caucused. I went through a caucus today, and I think there's more Democrat bills than there are Republicans. We're going to roll. I mean, I'm not starting off playing that game in the least. We caucused on every single bill, and I think the only one that we thought we might sit and talk about was one of the Republican bills.
You mentioned you had a four-corner with the governor, I think, on the budget, but what's the governor's role at this stage? What do you see he's trying to move or not move? And you talk a lot about charter schools. Has he expressed some direction he thinks would get agreement?
I think the meeting that we had yesterday was more the governor facilitating as governor to make sure that the four corners, the four caucuses had a plan to kind of at least come together at this stage of the game. What was our intention? It was expressed by all the leaders of the four caucuses that our intention is to immediately, which started actually yesterday and is now going on starting again at noon today, started about 15 minutes ago, where we've got the leaders of our budget teams meeting to go through what are the defining points of the different caucus positions that we have, just like we've done in past years. But as far as the governor's role in this, while he will, I'm sure, have people that are involved, yesterday it was more as a facilitator taking on the role of getting us at least on track.
Is there any hang-up in the budgets that haven't passed yet? I think it's the House capital budget and the Senate transportation budget that haven't passed the chamber yet, but correct me if I'm wrong.
In the House, we caucused on the House capital budget this morning. We spent quite a bit of time going over that. We were actually prepared to go out and vote on it, and then we were notified by the Democrat caucus that they wanted to put it on hold for the time being while they addressed whatever their issues are. You'd have to ask them what their concerns were.
Senate transportation, it's not a big deal. We took care of pretty much everything last year, so it should roll anytime. I mean, by tradition, it is the House turn to pass budgets. We've got 4 of the 6, I think, ping-ponging around now.
So the House did pass their transportation, right? So then,
And
a few days left to.
we've got, you know, we could move ours, or we could throw the final deal over ours as a striking amendment, bring it to the floor. There's a host of ways you can do it, but really this budget is and should be only very minor changes. The heavy lifting was last year.
The other thing, too, related to the capital budget in the House side is the intent was to throw the House capital budget as a striker over the Senate capital budget, which essentially then puts it straight into conference. It's the quickest path to get us at least talking instead of continuing to go back and forth in a conference, as far as a conference mode goes.
So we were handed out, the latest handout on the DOC reports on your O-band. When do you anticipate the Law and Justice Committee being finished with their investigation and offering some sort of report?
Well, based on yesterday's hearing, I think we realized there is a huge bit of work ahead for us. We learned yesterday that Secretary Kuchoki himself took a look at the governor's report and found a number of discrepancies in that report, downplaying the role of Bernie Warner, and not only in his mismanagement of the organization in general, but more specifically, that mismanagement and its impact on perpetuating the King Fix problem and not getting it done on a timely basis. And so Mr. Kuchoki took issue, and we heard how he, even though he shared his concerns with the investigators, those were not reflected in the report. Same with Ms. Doty, same with Ms. Bain. We are now taking a look at the witness statements that our investigator procured. I think it was wise to do so, and now compare those against the governor's report and see where there are maybe additional discrepancies, where the governor's report did not include the testimony of those key witnesses in downplaying the role of Bernie Warner. So that's what we're doing now. Once we finish that review, I expect us to have additional hearings, and maybe at some point we'll have Mr. Warner here if he'll come from Utah.
Any hearings next week, by any chance?
What's that?
Any hearings for next week?
Given the crush of what we're doing in our usual business, I'm not too optimistic we could schedule in a hearing. Wouldn't rule it out. Ultimately, Senator Patton will make that decision, but I think we'll probably have to have our subsequent hearings after the session ends. That's my guess.
Are you going to bring in the governor's investigators to ask them any questions about?
We may very well do so. We need to finish this review again to identify additional discrepancies between their report for the governor and what the witnesses have testified to. So once we finish that review, it may very well be that we bring in those two investigators.
You don't, doesn't sound like you can finish by March 10th. So do you need to get an additional allotment of money to cover through the interim?
I don't know, frankly. It's not so much a money issue, I think, as it is determining whether we may need additional subpoenas. If Mr. Warner is not willing to testify voluntarily, then we may need another, that and perhaps other subpoenas issued before the session is completed.
Can you issue a subpoena to somebody who's out of the state?
I'll tell you, as a trial lawyer, you're able to do that. I haven't frankly looked at the rule or had an opinion from our Senate lawyers, but there should be a means to do that, I would think.
Is it enforceable though?
Yes, what you do is you get in this typical civil context, get the subpoena issued, and then you take it to a court in Utah and have them enforce it.
Do you plan on asking the governor's investigators, Blackstone and Westinghouse, to show up?
I think I responded that very well, possibly we will, but I want to finish this review of the discrepancies.
Senator Schussler, you mentioned LEA funding or local effort assistance funding. I think you mentioned that maybe being part of the budget. Does that mean you're open to or supportive of extending the levy cliff?
Well, it's one of the things you accept if you extend the levy cliff, which is obviously a possibility. You obligate yourself to a sizable amount of money. So we're going to have to look for that money next year if we do it, and how we do it. It doesn't come for free.
How do you feel about extending it for 1 year versus 2 years, that levy cliff that school districts are facing?
You know, I think it's a real issue to discuss. And the information really wasn't available for a long time. You know, levy cliff, okay. But it wasn't until we were well into session that school administrators from my region pointed out that we didn't have a lot of 28% levy districts, but we had a lot of LEA districts. So it's a little more complicated than it sounds on the surface.
As far as the disjunction between the legislative funding cycle and the school funding cycle, you know, they start budgeting ostensibly on January 1st. Is there sensitivity to that? Do you have another proposal besides? Is there any other kind of proposal floating around besides a levy lift to deal with that and give the legislature some time to create funding?
I think there's a whole lot of good ideas, but as I've said before, if this was easy, a previous governor would have fixed it. If this was easy, there would be 60 votes in one chamber and 40 in the other if it was easy.
The House passed an authority for public facilities districts to extend their taxes from 25 years to 40 years at 96 to nothing, I think.
Mhm.
Do Senate Republicans agree with that? Do you have any problems with that?
There were some technical concerns that are being considered by staff that they weren't comfortable with.
So can you fix those before March 10th?
Really don't know, Jim. I mean, get into technical concerns of bonding and credit and debt. I don't know.
Would you consider raising the beginning salary for teachers? That's something the Democrats are still pushing pretty hard for.
You know, I think that's an issue you take up in a biennial budget, and it could very well be part of our final decision, but historically, you set that level in a biennial budget, not in the supplemental.
Agree.
So not to shake the policy bill stick too hard, but there's been several Democratic policy bills, Opportunity Gap, Voting Rights Act, the Toxic Act, that seemed on the verge of becoming hardy perennials that have gone a little further this.
Guess what? We passed every one of those out of Ways and Means last night. All three got out of Ways and Means. They got out of Ways and Means. They got out on bipartisan votes. We're certainly working on each and every one. The Lieutenant Governor pilled the Voting Rights Act. If you were there in rules today, there wasn't a single no vote. We are truly committed to working on the problems.
So what changed if it wasn't the case for 3, 4, 5 years of some of those?
You know, I think the issue has evolved. There's changes to the original bill that came over here 3 and 4 years ago. There's been some changes. I think people are becoming better informed than they were in the past about pros and cons. That's why it's evolving.
Well, and if you look at the House floor calendar, you'll see that this is the normal pattern. The least controversial bills hit the calendar first. Same thing's happening over in the House in terms of the easiest lifts, getting on the list first. I think you'll see the normal progression of tougher bills coming out later.
It wasn't normal in the previous 3 or 4 years. It was, very similar bills didn't move even on a relatively normal calendar. And that was, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I see.
Okay, well, I think we're about our anointed time. Thank you all for joining us. 1 o'clock is the plan.